I am doing the 40 plus Masters 1, 2, 3. I'm breaking up with Brent and Andy because they are sticking in the 2-3s because they are too young to race with us fast guys. And looks like we're gonna get a little bit of weather, maybe a couple minutes here or there for their race. Hopefully it clears out for our race. I could really do without that. I'm gonna find those tacos and I'm gonna eat those tacos. Believe that. Hey everybody, Brian Davis races and you can too. Welcome to today's Crit Race Voiceover. Today is day number 6 of Tour of America's Dairyland 2019. This race is in Janesville, Wisconsin, and as you can see, there is yet again some precipitation in our race. So this was a really interesting course, an interesting race, an interesting day weather-wise. There's just a lot going on in this race. So first let's talk about the course. So you can see that it's sort of a funky figure 8, kind of a bow tie. Yeah, it's an interesting shape. So how that looks in real life, well, you'll see the footage, but the start line goes down a slight uphill, but then after that goes down across a bridge, and we're traveling, which would be against traffic if there were cars on the road, in the United States at least, across to the other side, and then we do a very similar 1-block loop on that side, and then we come across the same bridge on the other side of traffic, which you're just about to see here, and do another little box on the other side, and around we go. So the part that makes that interesting is that it is a lot of turning and then 2 very straight sections. So those barriers on the right are concrete, they are not plastic. It took me a long time to figure out that those were concrete and that I did not want to crash into them. So all these turns make it relatively difficult to pass, and it makes it relatively difficult to find a good rhythm. I really struggled, and I guess I talked to numerous other racers after the race, and everybody really struggled to find kind of a race line or a rhythm in these turns, or where they wanted to be on one turn versus the other turn. A lot of times in courses, the turns, there's less turns, so you have more opportunity to think about, well, I like to be inside on this one and outside on this one to save energy or stay safer. That's always the balance. But this course, there's just so many turns that, I don't know, I guess it kind of got thrown off every time. So really the only time to move up with any sort of predictability was on the bridge. But that presented some issues as well. So the issue with passing on the bridge is that on occasion it would work out fine. You could shoot up the left or the right hand side and you wouldn't have any issues, but frequently throughout the race the pace would slow down to the point where it was almost like a parade across the bridge. So it was difficult to sort of bust through, not that I necessarily had the legs to do so, but it made it difficult to bust through this parade at the front of the race in order to go faster. And if you did bust through it, then guess who's going to be the one going faster? That would be you, and everyone else is going to be behind you. So it was kind of a tricky spot to be in. It was hard to pass just a few people. So if you were doing passing, you were passing huge chunks of people, and that might put you in a position where you didn't necessarily want to be. But you'll see later in the race that I did just that. I passed a big chunk of people and got presented with a choice, and in the end I'm happy with the choice I made, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So alright, now let's talk real quick about the weather. So the weather was fascinating at this race. Before the race, it was, you can see in the intro to the video, it was fairly nice outside, and there were these little pop-up storm cells that were all around the area. So with our meteorology skills, we figured out, well, that there was a good chance that we were going to get a little bit of rain, and it looked like it was going to rain for maybe the first 15 minutes of our race, and then it would chill out. And that's pretty much what happened, except that rain was started a little bit before our race, of course, and it was pretty significant right before the start line. It was probably 15 minutes before the start. The rain came through, got the course pretty good, and then we started the race, and then they pulled us after that magic number, if you watch the channel, somewhere around 13 minutes, is this first chunk of the race, we get through that first 13-minute batch, and then they postponed the race. Weather postponed the race. So I think there was some lightning in the area, so they neutralized the race for one lap, and we come back around. And that was interesting. So some of the guys in the back, I guess, were not aware that we had neutralized, despite the fact the PA system saying it over and over and over again as you were going through. So there's a couple guys that were just storming up to the front like, this is their time to shine. Everyone else is dying and their legs feel great. But sadly, that was not the case. Everyone was neutralized. So we sought shelter for about 40 minutes, I guess, somewhere 40, 45 minutes, somewhere in there. So we ended up, the Janesville Gazette, the newspaper in town, opened up their loading dock, and we hung out in their loading dock for 45 minutes or so, which was very gracious of them. And that's generally was the case, not generally, it absolutely was the case for the entire city of Janesville. It was an amazing welcome mat from the city for this bike race. Just incredible. The whole town was supportive and excited to have all these folks come to their town, and people from, I mean, just again, people from all over the world race Tour of America's Dairyland. So it's a great way for a city to showcase themselves and put their name on the map a little bit and introduce their city to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, a lot of which live in the upper Midwest and a big chunk live in Wisconsin. So when we're thinking about places to go and things to do, Janesville is definitely on that list now, which it certainly was not before. So this was such a cool place to race a bike, and they did an amazing job of pulling together sponsors. Guys, the preems on this race were absolutely bonkers. Just crazy. There was a $1,000 preem in our race. There was a $300 preem in our race. There was a $200 preem in our race. There was a $100 preem in our race. And I want to say there was even another $500 one, but I could be wrong about that. So somewhere between $1,600 and $2,000, if memory serves, was given away just in our race. And I know the 2-3s category, which Brent and Andy did earlier, also did a $1,000 preem, and I can't imagine how much money they gave away in the pro race. It had to be like $6,000 or $7,000. So I think, unless someone wants to correct me, this has got to be the highest paying bike race in the country. I would have to say, at least for preems. Just incredible, and a fun course to try to get those. Now next year, I guess there was some construction on one of the bridges that goes across their town, which is why we went across the same bridge twice. So that was, I think the course will be different next year. But honestly, I like this course. I think it was cool. It was such a mental challenge to deal with the course that I don't know that I'd be too quick to change it if I were the organizer. So in any event, this is the neutralization. Obviously, because we're going really, really slow. So they come around, they captured our place they told us they were going to capture our places and then restart us, and in the end, we were all together, and they didn't do that. They just restarted everybody in one lump, which was fine. Let's see, then we had our 45-minute break, so let's cut to after the break. 2 hours later. No, it was only 30 minutes. 40 minutes, somewhere in there. So, all right, they line us up, and you can see this is like a totally different day. I assure you it is the same day. Now, like I said, we got 13 minutes of this race completed, and the plan was for us to race another 45 minutes. So a couple interesting logistical things. Number one, if I had to do it again, I would have changed socks. 100% I would have put on dry socks. I know they would have gotten wet in the first couple laps again, but it just would have felt amazing to have a few minutes in dry socks. Guarantee that. And I'm almost positive that I saw a veteran racer in our group with dry socks when we did the restart. So, Carlos, did you put dry socks on? Because if you did, that's where I got this idea, and I thought it was brilliant. So, well done. If you did. If you didn't, I don't know how you keep your socks so clean in a rainy race. Amazing. All right. So, now, in the beginning of this section of the race, you're going to see I finally do something in a bike race. So this is a big day for me. Big, big day. I get presented with a choice in a minute or so where I'm going to try to pass a chunk of people, and I do so. But once you get around this bubble at the front of the peloton, you have this moment where you're either going to lead the peloton or you're going to try to hide out and wait for somebody else to do it. Or that would be a great time to break away. So if I had stronger legs and lungs and heart and all those things, this would have been a good move that I make here, I think, in my opinion. You may have a different opinion, and if you do, please leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from what you think I may have done incorrectly in this move that'll be coming up shortly. I guess we're still a minute or two away from that move, but there's a big chunk of this race that's just this, me sitting in the back third of the race, doing the best I can to pick off one or two riders here or there, and then I have somebody pick off one or two from me, so I kind of keep floating in the same space. So I cut that out of the race, but I did leave in this move that I'm going to make shortly. And then also real quick, let's talk about the sprint finish. So you can see from that last turn to the sprint is extraordinarily short. So really the victory for this race was established 2 turns back. So the next time around I'll kind of announce where that moment was. I think this rider in front of me in this Bianchi, someone, either him or someone on his team, had a highly unfortunate crash in the finishing of this race, and I think there was a collarbone broken, so hope that person's doing okay. It's unfortunate part of bike racing, but overall this race was very safe. Racing with the Masters category versus the 2-3 category, which is what I was doing earlier this week, it's a totally different experience. The Masters category is much more relaxed. I don't really feel like I heard anybody yelling at anyone else. Everyone sort of knows that this is not life or death, so we all kind of relax a little bit. If somebody wants a wheel and it seems like a big deal to them, they can have the wheel. It's okay. And then in the end, in the last lap or so, then you're not going to find that. You're going to find people that are obviously aggressive and holding their wheel and not going to let strangers in, or they're going to race their bike really hard. But that typically doesn't occur until the last couple laps. So before that, it's not a huge deal. Whereas in the 2-3s or other categories, you seem to get a lot of bumping and pushing and shoving for every single inch, which makes sense if the race is flat out 100% the whole time. The Masters category, this was a hard race, don't get me wrong. I set some records for my heart rate, at least for 2019, not all records. And I struggled physically at moments to get through this race, but overall it's a much more even pace. It's less streaky. And it's just generally, I was much more comfortable in this race. So part of it is I know all the guys that I'm racing with because I shouldn't say all the guys, but I know a big chunk of the guys that I'm racing with because we've all been racing together for a number of years. So you kind of know, for the most part, what people are going to do here and there. All right, I think maybe I'll have my move here shortly. Let's see. Yes, indeed, my move will be coming up here shortly, so I see this opportunity to get around the bunch, and then there's this bubble at the front, and either I'm going to go at parade pace or I'm going to go on my own. So I make a decision to go on my own, which I feel good about. It felt great to put in some sort of effort, some sort of move. You can see my watts are, I'm definitely past threshold. In thinking about this and how to establish a breakaway, I'm not good at this, guys. Full disclosure, I've never established a breakaway. I've only been 1 or 2 solo breakaways by myself. Obviously solo breakaway by myself, but I'm definitely not well versed in breakaway things. So what I probably should have done is sprinted away from the group on that straightaway much harder. So I had a gap, but it was only because the other group wasn't seeing me as any sort of threat, so which is appropriate. They probably shouldn't. But I was able to turn these turns much tighter and sharper and faster. I was, again, very happy with my tire pressure. I put them at 72 and 75 again. The braking surface on these, I kept my carbon wheels on here for this race, which was highly unfortunate because it poured more than any of the other races, but I survived. There's just got to really, really squeeze on those brakes to get any sort of braking action. And then when you have other guys with disc brakes, that's where things get really interesting because they can stop on a dime, and I certainly cannot. So these crosswalks, I didn't actually feel any slipperiness in any of the paint. I think it had rained enough that all the oil and dirt was off the roads. So overall, the grip on the course was just fine. There's a couple manhole covers at the apex of the turns, but even those weren't awful, and most people are wise enough to avoid them. So here is where the end of my moment is. So I made it, I don't know, a half a lap, right? But then I tried to, because I didn't give it a maximal effort to stay off the front there, but I gave it enough where I was definitely hurt, and you can see my heart rate is pretty jacked up for me. And I tried to keep myself at the front because I thought, well, if this is the time where something goes, this is when it's going to go. And maybe I could follow along with it if I caught the right particular draft. My ability to close it at this point was totally wasted. But you can see that person goes for attack. That was a good, clean attack. Now, this attack that, I don't know if I'd call this an attack or a cover. I don't really know what to call this. But the that move right there, right off the front, I don't think that was well executed if the intention was to get to or establish a break. So what I learned a couple years ago when I had someone else do a race analysis of one of my races was that attacking from the front is definitely a bad idea, because everyone, like you could see, that was a great example of why you wouldn't want to attack from the, as a perfect example why you wouldn't want to attack from the front, because you stand up and start moving, everyone else can see or sense that, and then they can stand up and start moving. So you're not at any greater speed than they are. You may get a half a second or a second in front of them because you had the idea to jump, but their ability to respond to your jump is no problem at all. Whereas, if you were to come from, like I did in my attack, if you came from the back over the top of a group of cyclists like this, or in a turn or something like that, and just carve a turn, you can create a gap for yourself, and then you have to hit it really hard. So what I've learned over the years is that or what I've heard and learned over the years is that in order to establish the break, you really need to push much harder than you think. Half the goal is to get space, the other half of the goal is to demoralize anyone who would want to chase you. And so what I mean by that is you have to create a big enough gap where people look at that and say, like, I don't feel like I'm going to do that. So that's my thoughts on establishing a little bit of a break. So then there's me tucked back into the last third of this race again, and I'm going to skip a big chunk to get to the last 4 laps of the race. So I will not play music for you today. I will just cut it out, and then we'll jump to the last 4 laps. And I'll give you some mistakes I made in the last 4 laps, because by then I was recovered from this effort. So let's do that now. 4 laps to go. All right, one of the things I was mentioning about that restart is they said 45 more minutes of racing, which was great, but I didn't really restart my Garmin very well, so I didn't know how much time was left in this race until literally that moment that it was 4 laps to go is when I became conscious of how much time or effort was left in this race. So that was a kind of a surprise to me, and a race management error, I guess I would say. So I put a lot of mental effort into staying at the front of this bike race this day, but you can see I've failed miserably at that. I just wasn't able to stay up to the top as often as possible. Now here I am with 4 laps to go, and I am up in the front, but my ability to stay there, I guess I don't have an explanation for it other than, well, let's see. Let's watch the tape and see what I screw up. So you can see there's one rider that comes on the inside of that turn. Another rider comes on the inside of that turn. And then looks like I gave up another spot there. Now, my hope was when that rider went by that I could grab his wheel, but then his teammate grabbed his wheel, which is good for them. But that's where if I would have been able to make that move and stick with those guys, that would have gotten me past 7 more guys right there, 8, maybe even 10 guys. I would have been in a much, much better position with 4 to go. So that was, looking back on it, I think that was really the critical mistake that kicked me to the back of this race with 4 laps to go. Not that it wouldn't have been something else, but that's definitely an issue. So this is my teammate right in front of me, John Robertson, and John had a good race. He ended up finishing ahead of me, and we'll see. He skipped a wheel pretty good in the last lap, so we'll see if we got that on film. But he saved it, which was a nice catch, Johnny. That would have been miserable to crash at that speed. So, yeah, that was a learning experience for me to watch that, because I think that was a critical moment when I screwed things up. Now, I don't know if those 2 guys got up here to the front. Oh, there's one of them, I think, coming back from the Meteor team. But you can see that it's just stretched out in front of me. And I think there was a little move on the front here. that might have caused the kick the hornet's nest, so to speak, and people were getting pretty worked up. And you can see this is a gap that we don't necessarily have to close. So this person closes it for us, but with 4 to go, that's a big gap. And then you can see it just mushrooms out and everything slows down again. So I think there was some sort of move off the front, and then people thought better of it, or the move was not cooperating, so then they came back. I think there was some chatter at the cool down lap about who was supposed to pull in a breakaway and who wasn't supposed to pull, and you can imagine that these riders had different opinions on who was supposed to pull when. Okay, sorry. Took a little break there. You didn't know that, but I took a break because my neighbor is having the slowest lawn mowing session I've ever seen, so I had to see when he was almost finished. All right, so now I'm way back in the race with 3.5 laps to go, and this is not a good place to be. Now the trick is, in the lower categories, you can move up in 2 or 3 turns. You can launch yourself up to being the top 10 in no time. That doesn't really happen as you get faster and faster. So you have to be much more methodical about when you start to make these efforts to move up. So looking at my sprint at the end, I was able to put together somehow 1,354 watts, which is great, but it's actually not great. What I should have been doing is using some of that power, some of those matches, to put myself in a position to be closer to the front, and then had a little bit less powerful sprint, but at least that's what gets you the top 10s and top 5s, is putting yourself in a position, especially on this race. This race was so much about positioning and so much less about raw power or anything like it. So this does tend to happen in these Masters races, where you'll get down to crunch time, and for whatever reason there'll still be these pretty dramatic slowdowns. So in the end, like, if I had spent that 4th lap not stressing out about getting up to the front, it probably would have been fine, because you can almost always count on somewhere in the last 3 laps you're going to get this crazy slowdown and allow everyone to kind of get hope figured out again, and then all of a sudden hopefully a team takes control of the front end. That's why teams are really nice to have. As you get further up the categories, you see much more coordinated racing, which in the end makes it a lot safer for everybody, because if a team takes over the front of the race, it straightens everything out, and then there's much less argy-bargy for position, at least in the last lap or 2. All right, so I think we're going to get down to, well, we're definitely into 3 laps. I think this is going to be 2 to go coming up here. Sorry, I kind of lost track. But, yeah, this would have been a good time for me to be trying to move up. Now I'm in the middle, so I'm kind of stuck. Well, maybe I do that. I know it was on my mind, but my ability to execute getting up to the front was tricky, and my heart is just pegged. So I definitely know I was struggling. The roads had dried by now, which is great. I don't think there were any wet corners anymore, and it definitely got hot. So it went from freezing cold when we did this restart to just very, very hot and humid by the time we got going again. So, oh well. All right, let me see if anything interesting happens other than me hanging out in the back here. And it might look like those guys I'm on the same turn as the lead group, right? But I'm so far back, there's no way I'm going to be able to get around all these people to get anywhere near competitive at the end of this race. And I know that. So if I want to do that, I have to start doing that now. So either I'm going to move up on the outside, or I'm going to move up on the inside. But being in the middle is a restful place to be, but it's not a great way to get position. And again, this race was all about positioning, because it's turn, 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 turn. So if I had more power, this would have been a good spot to move up and grab a few places. I guess I did not have the capability to do that, but the opening was there. And then I saw that, I remember this, I saw that happen, and I thought, all right, this is going to be good. But that rider ahead of me did not go with that person that was sprinting up the road, and it would have been a lot better if he had, but he didn't. And I kind of crashed this turn. I think I got growled at for that, but I think it was fine. All right, this is the last lap. Oh, there was Johnny's wheel twitch. This is the last lap. And so now, once the speed really picks up, it's nearly impossible to pass all these people. Especially on this course, because there's no room to do it. So even if you had the power, there's really no place to be able to get to do that. So again, if I would have grabbed that Meteor guy right here. Oh, see, I did that. Good job, Brian. But I guess we didn't get far enough. And that group is just motoring, you know, like we are going really, really fast. 26 miles an hour right now. 20, I'm sure faster. It feels like faster than that, that's for sure. And then they're hitting the turn. There's zero contention. So to win this race, you had to take off pretty much right here so that you secured the final 2 corners to that little straightaway sprint. Now that rider right there, like instead of worrying about blocking my line, he really should have been covering space. But whatever reason, he wanted to push me out instead of closing the gap that was right in front of him. You know, no big deal, but it would have been better to focus on moving forward instead of worrying about me. So that's the end of the race. Subscribing. Our goal on the channel is to grow our sport, grow our knowledge, and grow our fitness. And a special thanks to City of Janesville. I stopped by these folks on the course on my cool-down lap, and they gave me a cool-down lap beer. Lovely. And that was just the vibe of the whole day. Just an awesome race.